Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. I'm here with my good friends, Greg Sterling, John Gerard, and Neil Polacek. Hey, guys.
What's happening?
What's happening? Well, it's been a minute since our last podcast. A lot has happened. A lot has happened in the world of AI. A lot has happened with the Palisades fire here that I was part of, and hopefully my house will be fine and everybody in the area will be able to rebuild quickly. It's been pretty crazy, but let's jump into the AI stuff because there's so much going on. Some of our top stories that we're going to cover today in today's episode are DeepSeek. DeepSeek shook up the world this past week, and we'll get into that. We'll talk a little bit about OpenAI's AI operator and what that means. That's agentic AI and how people will be able to use that. There was previously something that was created by AI was not copyrightable. However, now as long as there's a human in the loop, and that's the primary driver of this intellectual property, and the AI is an assistant in that, you can now copyright things that you use with AI. So we'll dig into that a little bit. And then there's a really interesting story about, does AI powered or AI enabled help businesses sell their product or not? And we'll talk a little bit about that because that was an interesting article that provided some insights there. But first, let's jump into DeepSeek. DeepSeek shook up the world this week.
Nvidia, lost, I think it was $6 billion.
600 billion. 600 billion in one day. I mean,
largest single day loss.
Yeah, it's clawed some of that,
but not
back,
all of it. And I think it just, it forces the world to rethink what this whole AI thing is about in terms of scale, in terms of capital investment, and in terms of, I think, John, you said power, right? Like this thing doesn't use as much power, which was the big constraint to what we were thinking, we thought was going to be the big constraint.
Well, I think the big headline here, so Nvidia's chips, which are GPUs, graphical processing units, by the way, invented for a totally different purpose. It just happens that they're extremely useful for doing the kinds of parallel processing you need to do to create LLMs and then to use them, right? So Nvidia did not build these chips for this purpose, and all of a sudden,
it was for gaming, right?
It's for gaming. It was absolutely, yeah, because it's the same kind of parallel processing that they use to render 3D images as you're moving through a game, right? So that's kind of where all that came from. Again, just happens to be the case that it's really good for this kind of thing, also good for crypto. But that's where Nvidia's explosion has come from over the last little bit of time. Now, the assumption has been up till this point that you needed increasing compute power in those GPU chips in order to run, to build and to run these more and more sophisticated models. And, we're talking, to the tunes of hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to develop the biggest of the models. So the real shot across the bow here was DeepSeek used a lot of the older NVIDIA models. By the way, I'll mention, as far as I can tell, or older chips, they actually still used NVIDIA. So NVIDIA is still in the loop here. It's just not their super expensive, most cutting edge chips.
NVIDIA CEO was reminding the market of that. They still used our chips.
It's still NVIDIA, right? Like it's not like they figured out a way to do it on Apple Silicon or something like that. But the point was, the headline was, what is taking other people hundreds of millions or $1 billion to create, these guys did for $6 million. And if you look at the benchmarking on the major benchmarks that people use to determine, is a model any good or not? Like, how good is it at reasoning? How good is it at answering questions? It seems to perform as well as, and in some cases better than, OpenAI and Claude, et cetera. So that's the big deal. And it really is quite a big deal.
And on that note, what's also interesting about that is this concept of what's called an SLM, a small language model, versus an LLM, which is OpenAI has their LLM, Gemini is an LLM, Perplexity, Claude, all of those are these large language models, which drives all that compute power, because when it computes and when it runs a script, it uses all this energy and compute power to run that. When you run a small language model using a fraction of the compute power to do that. So the architecture of DeepSeek is a small language model. And what's also interesting about this is that they basically scraped all the data from OpenAI to train its own model. So that's how quickly it could learn, because it would just hit OpenAI, learn from it, get answers, and extrapolate out from there. But it did it with these agents that were these small models that went deep on a particular topic. And when you use that small language model, you're not using as much compute power, which is why they could get to that $6 million number to be able to build their model out.
So in a certain way, it's parasitic, right? I mean, what happens now when everybody tries to replicate this, and how do you build that small language model unless you have access to a already trained big data set, big LLM? What is that a problem that now presents itself to everybody else who's going to try and replicate this success?
It's a good question. I mean, I think this is one of the really interesting things we may have mentioned in a prior episode. The growth of what's happened here in AI is actually borrowing from the academic model, which is open publishing, right? And that's quite different than a lot of other techs that have grown up, over the years. Like, for instance, chip manufacturing, which is a very closed commercial model where nobody shares their secrets about how they manufacture chips. But because this came out at least partly from sort of the academic tradition, and actually Google's first paper was published in a very open way, it kind of set the stage for this, that the standard approach here is open everything, which means, to your point, that all of this training data, all of these models are available for anybody to sort of slurp up and adjust. And what'll be interesting is to see if somebody like DeepMind or some other fast follower decides to close off whatever they build on top of it. Like, are they, and yes, there are open source licenses that should disrupt that behavior, but all bets are off when the dollars are big enough.
Well, and Llama's model is open source too, of course.
DeepSeek?
I mean,
we never
model.
saw this in our data, Greg, DeepSeek, come up in any of our stuff so far. I mean,
well, DeepSeek has really only appeared for most people in the last week or week and a half. I mean, it's been around for, I think, a couple of years, and it sort of evolved from its what it was doing initially. But for most of the public, it's really only been about a week or week and a half, and it sort of exploded into the number one downloaded free app in the App Store and the iPhone's App Store. And so there is a high level of awareness of DeepSeek, in the same way that ChatGPT got all this kind of major media publicity and kind of free exposure. DeepSeek is also getting some of that, and it's also getting some negative exposure too, because people are worried about, people who use DeepSeek, the data all goes to China. And so there's some confusion about, the Perplexity and Microsoft, and I think a couple others have already put DeepSeek on their servers, and there's some confusion about whether China is getting access to that data. So there's some pushback and some negative coverage going on, but they've gotten broad exposure very quickly. My kids are talking about DeepSeek, so it's pretty widely known. Now, if you went to, some very remote place where people are not very involved with technology,
like most of
they probably wouldn't know about it. Yeah, but most major metro areas, people, where there's been any media exposure, people know about it if they don't know what it does. It's like OpenAI from China, but, cheaper or something.
I have to imagine the negative exposure is coming from, a defensive kind of position from a lot of these companies saying we have to protect our cap table here or our capital structure.
Let's talk about that for a second, because that's a pretty radical implication of all of this. Is like, why would people like Mark Andreessen have complained about the commodification or commoditization of the foundational models, and that is kind of a race to the bottom, or whatever his language was, and investors have been very nervous about, is this defensible? Are they going to get their money out? And along comes this very inexpensive and seemingly high performing alternative that people can replicate, they can use because it's open source, or other people might replicate the methodology, that would seem to discourage VCs from investing. That there's no value creation anymore at that layer. You want to invest in the application layer, or whatever is going to be the brand. So
Yeah.
Isn't it ironic that these are the same companies that are under fire from everybody else who owns intellectual property, who's created all this intellectual property that they've mined, and they've said, well, hey, we're just like good corporate citizens here. We're going to use it for other purposes that are going to help society. Meanwhile, they're just ripping off all that IP. And so isn't it ironic that, and almost obvious actually, that you have somebody who's done it cheaper and faster?
It's karma.
That's like what technology does, right? So
yeah, instant karma.
Like, how could you be upset as Mark Andreessen or an investor? In fact, you love the fact that technology continues to optimize and gets cheaper and faster. So it just
not when it impacts your investments. Just not when it impacts your investment.
So I do find that ironic, and yeah, it's a bummer for anybody who's an investor in OpenAI, I suppose. But then you have, like, I think what's also happening in the marketplace with OpenAI just today. In fact, they just announced a partnership with the U.S. government to be able to focus on healthcare primarily, and use their language model for healthcare innovation. And so, yes, there's Fortune 500, but there's also Fortune 1 with just government dollars. And when you're getting those kinds of dollars, or you have, Stargate, for example, this $500 billion project that was just recently announced, where all this money is going to be flowing into it. And then you have a company like DeepSeek that just subterfuges that whole financial structure. It really becomes disruptive when you do the math on those kinds of things.
Well, and doesn't it become potentially more available to everybody, that it's inexpensive and it gets widespread use, and everybody's using it in some fashion? And I think that's another implication that's out there if it sustains itself and if it's good. But I think they'll say it's Chinese and you can't use it anymore. I think that's where it's going to go first.
If the TikTok thing is any kind of indicator, they try to do that with TikTok, and then everybody went to Red Note, and it's a game of whack-a-mole where it's like you plug up that hole and they pop up over here with Red Note. And the problem with Red Note is that it doesn't have the safeguards and other kinds of things that TikTok has invested in their algorithm to actually protect people.
And it's all in Mandarin. Like it's as Chinese as it gets. It's like
it's really Chinese. It's real Chinese.
It's crazy.
with all the censorship and everything.
Yeah, John, I think you mentioned that a while ago. There's this cat and mouse or whack-a-mole or whatever you want to use. But there's always that's going to happen where, if you try to plug it up over here, it's just going to pop up over there. And well, I mean, there's a whole conversation that we probably can't have today about these AI models being used by bad actors, China, it's Russia, Iran, to do hacking and cyber espionage and things like that. So they're taking these tools and using them to amplify whatever else they were doing. And I'm certainly not qualified to really speak about it, but that's going on. So that's, you can't just sort of throw up your hands and say, well, we can't do anything because, it's just too difficult to defend against.
Greg, as Jake Sullivan, the former national security advisor, I read something where he was saying, by far our biggest threat is China and AI, by far, from a national security standpoint. So, I would expect to see that bar go way up over the next couple of years, and they sense that.
I think it becomes increasingly, it's the double side of technology, right? We've got all these benefits flowing from AI, and then you've got all these misuses and abuses, or sort of dark use cases that will be equally, demonstrated. And so this is the the blessing and curse of any new technology, and this is especially powerful.
There's going to have to be some kind of global, kind of alliance or agreement, or some sort of, whatever, kind of platforming of this, so that countries can, interoperate at some level with this advancement. Because, otherwise you're just going to have, you're going to have these situations that
It's another version of the arms race. It's another version of the arms race.
It is.
Right? I mean, it's very unlikely that in the next 4 years we will have some global consensus or convention around, the use cases, so that they're promoting safe uses of AI and discouraging or trying to prohibit unsafe uses or espionage or hacking or fraud or whatever. I just don't, in this current environment, I just don't see the cooperation that you're suggesting, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I think we'll just need to see how it plays out. I don't, not quite sure what happens with Project Stargate and and all of that, but a lot of money that's going to be flowing to that project, that maybe that creates some interoperability globally somehow.
So let's talk about Operator, because that's another semi-major development, not as big perhaps as DeepSeek.
Yeah.
In the scheme of things.
Go for it.
Claude and Google announced agents. Claude demonstrated it. Google announced it, but hasn't really demonstrated it, to my knowledge. Prior to OpenAI, OpenAI was working on agents, and they sort of in the form of a kind of like Google Alert kind of tool. They sort of leaked out their initial. Their first agent was like an alert kind of thing where you can set up topics. I don't know what they call it, whether it's topics or something, and then it'll track certain topics for you in the same way that Google Alerts did that. And that's an agent, but very trivial. But what they announced a couple of weeks ago was Operator, which can actually browse the web, fill out forms, click on links, and transact. So it can book appointments, it can buy tickets. And there's a bunch of demo videos online that show how it's being used. And the use cases that they show in the OpenAI demo video are buying sports tickets, booking a restaurant reservation, booking cleaning services, house cleaning services, and stuff like that. So, you enter a prompt, it then goes and opens a browser, its own browser, and then it goes through the process as a user would, looking at TripAdvisor reviews, selecting hotel dates, booking at a hotel, and or you can book an Uber. You can shop for groceries with Instacart. So it does a lot of stuff at the very bottom of the funnel, which is to book appointments or to buy
wasn't it all
things
local
on your behalf.
It was all local stuff too, right?
No, it's not 100% local, but it's mostly local, meaning these are transactions that have a real world component to them. You go to the game, somebody comes to your house to perform the service, you eat at the restaurant, you go to the hotel. Buying airline tickets, which I think it can do, is not a local function. It can browse any website. It can't really read JavaScript, is my understanding, and so certain websites might not be compatible with it. But on the one hand, it's really remarkable that it can do all these things, and it leads. We'll talk about this, but it sort of leads to all kinds of scenarios where you can go ask it to do a bunch of things in parallel, and it will do those things, and you can sort of walk away.
It's the poor person's assistant, personal assistant.
Not just the poor person's, but right now, right now it's kind of like watching paint dry, because you have to sit there and babysit it. You see every step. You see it would be much more efficient for me to book a hotel than for me to use Operator to book a hotel, because it has to clarify things with you. It has to go through every step, and it may make choices that you don't agree with, and then you have to go back and correct them. And when it comes to making a final booking or a payment, it will ask your permission at this stage. So you need to be there to answer its questions and to authorize it to do the final steps. That won't always be true. It'll get faster. it'll get more trustworthy and it'll expand its capabilities. But it's a pretty interesting development that has a lot of implications for website design, for search, for how consumers shop, and how consumers interact with underlying businesses and services.
Yeah.
Well, usernames and passwords are an interesting question that come up with this kind of functionality. It's interesting because if you look at trends of how people share data, and especially like my daughter's age group, they share their location on Snapchat and do that kind of thing easily. We probably never would have, probably in our generation, or a lot of our friends probably would just never just openly share where you're located, but they do that kind of a thing. I'm using that as an analogy by saying at some point here, people are going to get more comfortable with giving their username and their credentials to an AI model so that it can enable this kind of free reign for the operator to be able to do what it needs to do and log in and out of systems and, use your credit card, which could be really risky if it goes
It
wild.
could be problematic.
I mean, it's exciting early on that it works like this, and I'm sure that the technology is going to get so much faster and better very quickly. But I was wondering a little bit about the credentials side of this, and how do you?
Yeah, I don't know. They don't talk about that. I mean, somewhere in some technical documentation, I'm sure that exists. But in the demos that I've seen and in my experience with it, that's not come up.
You override it in that moment. So when you enter in your credentials, the operator isn't looking at your
It
credentials.
pretends not to look. It just goes like this. Yeah.
Exactly. So you then interject and override that session, and then you give controls back to it once it's logged in.
Yeah, and you can take control of it.
$200 a month, right?
It's part of ChatGPT Pro. You're not paying for operator alone, but you're paying for additional features on ChatGPT. But operator is the main incentive for a lot of people, I think, at this point.
Yeah. And they would probably roll that out into the other plans later. I think there's a few ways this could unfold. It is pretty interesting. So if you think about what's really happening here, this is training the AI to interact as a human would with a website. And that actually goes, at least in the Claude model, I assume with operator as well, all the way down to mouse movements. So, one way you could solve this problem, if you were approaching it technically, is you could just read the HTML and figure out based on the HTML where to click, and then go request the information behind that button programmatically, like behind the scenes. And it wouldn't really ever render anything anywhere. It would just sort of find its way around through the raw code. That's not what they're doing here. They're actually rendering this on a screen and moving a virtual mouse around and clicking on stuff. Presumably, that's at least partly because they want these systems to learn how to interact directly with the visual website that has been designed for you and me, for human eyes. So one of the ways this could unfold, so presumably these models will get better and better at clicking. It'll be faster and faster. Right now, it is like watching paint dry to see Claude interact with the website. It's like, please just move your mouse to the OK button. Please click it. Please click it.
Watching usability studies.
It's unbelievable, right? And where's the fast forward button? So presumably those will get better and better. I wouldn't be surprised if something starts to develop around a markup for AI eyes only. So in the same way that we have, messages you can hide in HTML to talk to search engines and tell them what to do with a page, AI markup that allows, makes these sites kind of AI enabled so they can click around a little faster. And then over the longer term, here's the other bit that's interesting. There's a lot of speculation now about these AI agents actually dispensing with interfaces altogether. So the idea there is,
it's just data or code.
It's just data. It's just data.
Yeah.
Why do I even need to click through a website when as an AI, what I really want to do is just go pull the flight information, make the decision myself, and initiate the transaction.
Right. I mean, think about the ultimate implication of that, right? So I'm a consumer, or I'm an end user, and I have my relationship with Operator and ChatGPT, and I use it to do everything transactional that I want. Maybe it doesn't work for certain kinds of things, where you need to see images, you need to interact with content. But let's say I know what I want, or I mostly know what I want, and I just go tell Operator to do those things, and then it does them, and I have no interaction with the seller or the brand
all those
behind the
eyeballs
thing,
go away.
and they're
or the app or the website.
right, exactly. And so it changes the internet as we know it in a
Think
certain way,
about
or the mobile internet.
on Amazon,
Well, this
You
is
know,
this
right?
is
I need laundry detergent. Go buy XYZ laundry detergent. All I mean, Amazon's made a big business out of their ad model. That all goes away if I don't have to go. Yeah.
Yeah, that all goes away. I mean, it won't all
Right.
go away, but it could do something like this, you know.
And this is one of the reasons why there's a little bit of speculation in, for instance, the SaaS world. You know, there's I mean, the headline is this the end of SaaS? Is SaaS over? That may be, you know, overly dramatic, but it's the same question there with B2B applications as it is on the consumer side. Why would I have like this crazy bloated ERP system to do everything I need to do when an agent can just interact directly with the data layer and get what I need out of it and pull the strings in the ways that I would like them to be pulled.
Well, it seems also, John, you said a long time ago in one of our episodes about how, you know, computers, the exchange between humans and computers, where that like humans kind of adapted to this interface, and we learned how to use that. The table's kind of turned with this operator UI right now, where I think the reason why they're showing these steps along the way is because they want to train the humans now on this is actually what we're doing. So
It's a confidence building thing.
we trust it. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. It does feel funny. Like there is a sense in which it feels like we are building technology to interact with itself. It's like if I wanted to create something that can code well, would I first build a robot that can type code? Like that sort of feels like what we're doing here. Right. Is like building all these robots that can interact with the technology as we know.
I can do it. So like,
yeah.
But I mean, when technology is introduced, right? It's the horseless carriage phenomenon, right? Yeah. Like you've got the model, and then the next thing incrementally sort of references the earlier model. And as you get further and further away from what the original thing was, it looks more and more different and operates more and more differently.
Becomes its own thing.
Yeah. Fascinating. Really interesting stuff. Well, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about copyright and AI. Greg, you want to talk about what about this article and what's happening with the copyright department and the government?
I'll do it in a sort of a accelerated fashion. So the U.S. Copyright Office previously took the position that anything created with AI could not be copyrighted. So you couldn't copyright text or images or other creative work that had been produced by AI. And for people using AI, that's kind of a bummer for many reasons, because if you're creating something, you want to be able to control it. You know, if you create a logo with AI, you don't want somebody else to be able to rip it off and use it without some consequences. That may not be the best example. So now this week they issued some new guidance. I don't know what the legal effect is right now, but this is basically a position paper that I think will have legal consequences. It's called Copyright. The paper is called Copyright and Artificial Intelligence, and this is part 2. Copyrightability is the term they're using, and basically they're saying, and I haven't read this in detail, but basically the language is, you can now copyright something where AI has been used in the process by humans to create something, where humans are in control and they enlist an AI agent or tool, and there's an output that can be copyrighted, is the new position, where AI is a stand-in for humans, where there's not really any human involvement. What the language is let me just read this here. Where the system makes expressive choices, they're saying that may or may not be capable of copyright, but it's a kind of case by case thing. So there's a vast gray area.
The lawyers field day
clarifies everything.
If I write a novel and I use ChatGPT to help give me ideas, or at certain points in the story, help me with writer's block or choices that I make, that seems like that can be copyrighted. But to what degree? Where's the threshold? If I come up with a story, in my mind, murder mystery, and I sort of outline it at a high level, and then I let ChatGPT flesh it out and essentially write the rest of it, write the dialogue, develop the characters. Is that something that involves AI too much? And what about imagery? If I generate an image with one of these AI tools, Midjourney, ChatGPT, whatever, and then I tweak it a little bit with Illustrator or Photoshop or something, is that copyrightable? It gets into a lot of these problematic areas. But I mean, I think the good news is that the Copyright Office basically recognized the inevitable, that this is going to be so pervasive and so widely used by creative people that you can't really stop it, to the sort of whack-a-mole point earlier. And I think what they're contemplating is the use case like where they use de-aging technology in a movie. So they use an older actor, and they de-age him or her. They resuscitate the likeness of a dead person. And that's a piece of some larger whole that's substantially human created. I think that's what they're sort of envisioning, not where you say, with one of the song creators, I want house music with this kind of tempo, and you push a bunch of buttons and then it produces the song for you. I think that's a situation at the other end of the spectrum. But we'll see what happens. I mean,
we'll see. I mean, they're going to have to come up with some kind of
there's going to be lawsuits is what'll happen.
It's a lawyer's field
or whatever.
It's beautiful.
Or test cases, right? I mean, of various sorts. But we'll see. I mean, this is
the AI copyright.
Is that human involvement if we write the prompt to tell it what to do?
Well, it's a question of degree, I think. I think at the center of this is a question of how much human control, how much is the human choosing things with AI help versus how much is the AI then creating something independent of the human with maybe some light after the fact editorial.
Yeah, but if you're going to try to copyright something and you're going to try to get under the wire on this thing, you're going to say, well, it was more human generated. So there,
well, of course, you're going to misrepresent. You're going to misrepresent.
I predict a series by Banksy exploring all of this in the coming months.
The copyright Twitter series.
The banana nailed to the wall or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the duct tape. We'll find out in further episodes what happens here, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people pushing down.
Exactly.
Exactly. All right, guys. Well, why don't we wrap it up for today? We covered off on a lot of things. Really interesting with DeepSeek and what's happening there. I think the small language models will be part of this whole agentic AI phase that we get into, and it's going to be interesting to unpack that over future episodes here. So we'll leave it at that for today, but thanks so much, guys.
See you next time.
Great chatting with you.